Tsultrim, who has a strong background as an administrator, translator, trainer, media officer, and also as a manager. Jigmey studied, did his graduation in Tibetan University, Varanasi, majoring on Tibetan language, Asian history, Buddhist philosophy, and English literature. And then he did his post-graduation from Jawaharlal Nehru University, majoring on sociology. And he also got an opportunity to study in Japan, Ryokoku University, also studying comparative study in Buddhism. And he was also the former director of Tibet Museum. Okay. And currently he's working as a head consultant in Tibetan Career Center. That is a project for the economic development of the Tibetan community in exile. And they provide job placement and career counseling to the Tibetan youth who are unemployed and school dropouts. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Jigmey. Thank
you. Community in exile. So this word evolution is very deep and very wide, in fact. So if you go in details, I think it might take hours and hours. So I will try to make my presentation as brief as possible, and then since we don't have much time, so I'll try to speak within, say, maximum 25 minutes. Is it okay? Yeah. So it depends, I think, how boring that could be. So, we normally talk about identity, people, and culture, race, color, so many things, I think. But at broader level, I think, it all defines a background of a person's, individual's, history. So in simpler terms, I would say it's a history of mankind. Now when we talk about history of mankind, we have different histories, we have different informations, we have different, I think, learnings. And today I'm going to talk about what exactly we mean by saying the evolution of Tibetan community in exile. And before we speak about the evolution of Tibetan community in exile, here it's very important to understand how do we define by so-called this Tibetan identity itself. So I won't go much in, I won't go much in history, since I'm sure you must have done some kind of homework, or you must be aware with what really makes all about Tibet and all this thing. So I would like to start, say, from 1950s onward, when Tibet is under, or was under, the leadership of 14th Dalai Lama. And yes, I think we had a system called monarchism, right? Or sometimes we define also as kind of, a kind of autocracy. But having said that, His Holiness Dalai Lama is aware, or was aware, even that time, that there were some issues which were sometimes being hidden, or sometimes didn't come to that level of public's information. So that needs to be addressed, that needs to be solved, and there needs to be have a proper care of these kind of problems there. Despite the fact that we had these plans, or His Holiness had this personal desire to bring up these social issues there, or some kind of social disbalances there. But on the other side, Tibet was slowly, or maybe should I say gradually, was under the so-called attack of Chinese invasion. So His Holiness' plans could not succeed, couldn't materialize. And as a matter of fact, we became politically refugees in India in 1959. Now, after landed in India in 1959 in March, the first thing which His Holiness, what he thought important, was to introduce a system that could be transparent and that could be countable, and then that could be supported by the Tibetan people, first of all. And thinking of this, His Holiness initiated so-called the democratization of Tibetan community in exile. And the year was 1960, when Tibetans, normally, as you can see or you can find out that mostly throughout the year Tibetans are busy, I'm talking about in exiles, they're busy about their livelihoods. But when winter comes, you might see mostly or most majorly Tibetans, they gather in Bodh Gaya. So same in 1960, Tibetans, they joined for this winter pilgrimage, Buddhist pilgrimage in Bodh Gaya. Taking the advantage of that, His Holiness initiated about the introduction of democratic rights and democratic opportunities. And many of them, they came in front supporting His Holiness' ideas. And so that was the year when Tibetans first elected their representatives. And that was the year when this so-called members of Tibetan parliamentarians, they were called as Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies. And then that time, from 1960 till 1979, the members were elected for a period of 3 years. Now, you might feel that why His Holiness may have thought an urgent need of going for this kind of democratic norms or these kind of elections. As I mentioned before, His Holiness thought, or he has seen through his own visionary past or practices, that it may not be wise for a person to rule or govern a state or a country without knowing the proper right or without knowing the proper view from the public itself. Therefore, this word democracy, which is originally derived from a Greek word, which is called, I think, demos and kratos, means the power of the people. So, thinking and understanding the importance of this word, His Holiness, therefore, thought maybe gradually there will be a time when Tibetan people will learn about the importance of the democracy. And just to share you one of the incidents, then 1950s, when China, so-called People's Republic of China, starts invading, starts eating the southern or southeastern part of Tibet in 1950s, His Holiness in between, in 1956, has an invitation and visited India. At that time, it was, I think, 2500th anniversary of Buddha's parinirvana. So that time, His Holiness was also invited at the Indian Parliament. Now, Indian Parliament, when we talk about Indian Parliament, you can just imagine it's a multi-party sort of parliamentary, formation is there. There are so many shouts, so many expressions, the parliamentarians saying, no, this is not my view, I can't support these things. So His Holiness is shocked to see such kind of, political participation going on there. And then, after the so-called parliamentarian political debate, when they come out, they were friends. But yes, since they were politically elected, they represent the people's voice and they have to. And then His Holiness felt that this is something very important, which is totally absent, which is totally unexpected in that formation, so-called People's Republic of China. Because the boss, he said good, yes, good, good, everybody says. Bad, everybody says bad, bad. So there is no kind of that, that understanding. So thinking of this, His Holiness therefore thought maybe this is going to be a proper system of governance. And this is what we can be an example to the other people also, especially to the larger Tibetan audience. So that was the primary, or should I say, I think that was one of the elements that which really forced His Holiness that yes, the future Tibetan community should learn and exercise the importance of democracy. So now, I have some figures which I would like to share with you. And then accordingly, His Holiness also, a democratic institution or a democratic administration or a democratic country needs to have a constitution. And the fact remains unchanged by that time that Tibet doesn't have a moral political authority. We are a political refugee in India. So we can simply frame a future constitutional framework. And this is what His Holiness even did at that time in 1960. So now that the Tibetan administration or the Tibetan governance in exile has to be formulated on a system, on a discipline, on a norms which has to be constituted by the feelings, by the expressions, or by the will of the Tibetan people in exile. So thinking of that, the Charter for Tibetan Parliament in Exile, was done in 1991. Now in between this, as I said before, that that the Tibetans in exile all over, not only in India, all over in the world, they start electing their representatives. So from 1960 to 1979, we have the elected members called as Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies. And then they were elected for a period of 3 years, not more than that. Then after that, the name was changed and it then referred as the Assembly of Tibetan People's Deputies till 2006. And from 2006 till 2013, the Assembly of Tibetan People Deputies, it has then changed into Tibetan Parliament in Exile. So 3 years initially till 1969, then 5 years since then, 1979, and then we have the Tibetan parliamentarians. We have a total now as 44 members. And these 44 Tibetan parliamentarians are elected 10 Tibetan parliamentarians from each Tibetan provinces. And Tibet is comprised of 3 major provinces. That is Uzang, Dhumé, and Dhutuk. So these 3 important provinces do elect 10 representatives each. So that makes 30. And then plus we have 2 representatives from each denomination of religious school from Burn, Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya and Gelu. So we have 5. So it makes 10. So 30 plus 10, it becomes 40. And then another 4, 2 from Europe and 1 from North America and the last one from Canada. So that makes 44. So as of now we have 44 Tibetan parliamentarians who work as the voice of those Tibetan people living in exile. Am I clear to all of you? Or should I need to use the mic? Is it okay? Thank you. Normally I know a word called SAVE. So SAVE, it's quite a popular word, and particularly since it's an era of technology, so it's called SAVE, means save. Whatever you do, you save it. But save, if you go with the abbreviation, S stands for speed, and A for, this word, S for save, and A for, any idea? Can somebody make out what exactly you mean by A, and V and E? Anyway, so I'll share with you later. So I think, then yes, now I would also try to touch briefly some of the other changes, historical changes that happened in exile, in Tibetan constitutions, in Tibetan political decisions, okay? So, as I said before, initially the Tibetan parliamentarians, they were nominated. They were nominated by His Holiness. Later, they were elected by the Tibetan people. Now, in the cabinet, again His Holiness nominates. Then, there is a voting in the parliament. Now, this nomination also changed and elected by the Tibetan parliamentarians. Now, till 2001, even the Khalun Tipa, who is the head of the cabinet, he is also been nominated. And His Holiness thought maybe now this is a time that we should go for a further change. So in 2001, the head of the cabinet, so-called Khalun Tipa, he was then decided to be elected by the Tibetan peoples. So from 2001 till 2011, the Khalun Tipa, the head of the cabinet, Tibetan cabinet, was directly elected by the Tibetan people. And since then, this practice is being exercised. But a more historical incident that took place in 2011 was His Holiness devolved all his political and spiritual powers, political powers, to the elected head of the Tibetan cabinet. So thereby, now His Holiness, what we believe and what we pray, what we have faith, is a state, a head of the state. But head of the state in the sense, not like queen, but His Holiness has the supreme power. But His Holiness personally defined that the political system has to be managed by the head of the cabinet itself, the Sikyong. And this word, Sikyong, has come into exercise since then. Okay? Okay. I'm not sure whether I'm trying to make a proper sort of... Now what we Tibetan feel about this importance of democracy, when I look back to what we were in 1950s and then what we are today in 2013, I think certainly Tibetan peoples have learned a lot in exile. Now, when we talk about democracy, there are many democratic countries in the world, right? I have one report with me, which I would like to share with you. It says that the Democracy Index analyzes 165 independent countries and 2 territories to show the status of regional and worldwide democracy. The index uses 5 criteria: electoral process, pluralism, civil liberties, the functioning of government, political participation, and political culture. Each nation is categorized across gradient levels of regimes: full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regimes, and authoritarian regimes. Now, why I share with you this report is perhaps unsurprisingly the most democratic countries are found in Scandinavia, with Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and Denmark occupying the first 4 spots in the list, and New Zealand rounding out in the top 5. Overall, half of the world lives under a democracy of some form. However, only 15% of countries enjoy full democracy, and nearly a third of world's nations are ruled by authoritarian regimes. So when we have this figure in our hand, I'm sure the names of those countries which I have just listed right now, how much the people of those countries, they might have put effort in bringing democracy. From Norway to Denmark, and then so many others. Like from 2011 to 2012 itself, we have Libya, Egypt, and Morocco transitioned from authoritarian to hybrid regimes, with Libya experiencing the greatest democratic gains among all countries, which was a kind of study done in 2012. Now here, in Tibetan community exile, Tibetans, they didn't do anything. it was only the leader, and that is none other than His Holiness Dalai Lama, that he has been thinking that yes, this is the time, yes, this is the occasion, that Tibetans must be given the rights and the responsibilities of democracy. So it's a gift, in fact, for the Tibetans, including me. Being a student of sociology, we have studied Karl Marx, we have studied Lenin, we have studied so many others, but I can't sometimes imagine that this is the leader that we have. And today, see, we have been exercising with 3 pillars of democracy: legislature, executive, judiciary, and then the independent agencies. That includes audit, election, public service commission, and then others. So now we have a model here. Even though we are politically refugees residing in India for the last 50 plus years, but still we have a system that works democratically. So I'm sure there may be many questions from you which I think would relate to further dissemination of this, I think, presentation in other ways. So I would stop here, right? Because my personal belief is that 15 minutes is the best time for a person to say or talk, and then the other person to receive. So if I cross that 15, although I said maybe I try to speak between 20 to 25 minutes, but sometimes I do feel that it might little get over. So I'll stop here with this very few minute information, and I expect to have some kind of conversation with you in the sense that I can learn also, and there's something that you can bring with you also. Otherwise it will just like hollow thing. Thank you very much.
Hands, yes. The democratisation amongst the exile community is very good.
Right.
In the museum here, I read yesterday that should Tibet become more autonomous,
Right.
that the Tibetan exile parliament would not be the ones who would be the ones to take over,
Right.
to be the
Right.
government in Tibet itself. But I just wonder how realistic that is, given the political knowledge and status of Tibetans actually in Tibet itself. Like in practice, how would that possibly work? The only people with experience are the exile people, not the people living in Tibet. That's my question.
What I understand from you is that will it be possible in other way or in other ways that how if and perhaps if the issue of Tibet dissolves, and then if you get back there,
Yes.
so the kind of framework that we have for the constitution of Tibet, will that can be implemented there? This is what you are saying?
Yes, but without the leaders that you have here in the exile community.
Yes, now I think in that case, I think we have to think in broader terms. Because what I do understand is that with the People's Republic of China, what we are talking about is a genuine national regional autonomy. So expecting that this national regional autonomy has been given to the Tibetans to exercise our own rights there, right? So in that case, we may need to frame a new constitution, right? A constitution which has also been okayed by the PRC. Because the one that we have here may not be suitable to them, right? Then they might, after some time, asking for a bed to lie down. So that kind of still there. But what we are still sticking to the real issue is then, till 1970s, the then Premier, Deng Xiaoping, what he clearly, I think, spoke to us, or confirmed, or conveyed to us, is that except independence, everything is negotiable. When he put this demand, or when he put this agenda before us, we were ready to talk, because we had already did our own preparations, I think. And His Holiness, by that time, was very much not in favor of going for independence, but going for autonomy. Because today, the things in Tibet is becoming more worse and worse. And this is the time, today here we are talking about so-called, the evolution of Tibetan communities in exile. Maybe a decade later, or maybe some couple of decades later, Tibet issue will be an historical issue, that's it. You won't find. So this is, so realizing the essence or realizing the alarming conditions availing there inside Tibet, we therefore may have to work upon a constitution which is also acceptable to the PRC, given the fact that we are being given the autonomy. This is what we think. Am I?
Yes. In fact, mentioning Deng Xiaoping,
Yes.
I read that he made a prophecy back in 30. Maybe we have to wait until 2030 for, given that the whole of China is not democratic,
Right.
they're not going to make one province.
This is a post call. So 2030 is so far, I think. So maybe more earlier than this, there's a hope of some kind of change. But yes, it's our duty, because we represent voice for the voiceless Tibetan peoples inside Tibet. And here we have all of you today. I really feel it's a great opportunity for me to personally express my gratitude that you all took out your time to come here, at least to share something, at least to show a kind of solidarity with a just cause, I think. So I'm really thankful. So some other concerns, questions we have?
My name is Ronnie.
Sorry?
My name is Ronnie.
Ronnie,
In Exile.
right?
What's your expectation of us to do to help to solve? I don't know. What do you think we can do to help? Or what do you have any expectation from us now being here?
Mm-hmm.
What you expect from us to do after we're going from here?
When I say we, I don't mean we as a Central Tibetan administration only, but we also includes the Tibetan peoples residing in exile. What we expect from people like you, that don't get biased, okay? Be impartial. Look into the information that is available today before you, okay? In terms of newspapers, in terms of computer, in terms of so many other electronic, print, whatever the information that you have. Go through it and try to find out that Tibetans are worth for struggling the cause of Tibetan or not. Just to find out by yourself, And then if you find that yes, there is a reason that why Tibetans are struggling for the cause, then being as a human being, right? As a human being, then try to do something justly. This is what only we expect. Not that just because, the Tibetans, they are politically refugees and come in favor of them. My personal feeling, I won't expect that kind of support. I would rather request or expect from people like you today who are here to know more, try to know more about the factual information of what's happening inside Tibet. Of course, that is something a little difficult. And the other information that you can share with your own friends or some other sources that are available today. Today, I think we believe it's an age of technology, and the information is available at the fingertip. Just you press the mouse, then everything is there, I think, regardless of what kind of sources that you're using, right? So this is what I expect from you. I just would like to share, taking this opportunity, one of my personal, I think, experiences that I had. I was in Japan in 2010, and now in Japan, English is like impractical. There's no use of English. So you have to speak Japanese in case if you have to sustain yourself in Japan. So I joined a Japanese school there. It's been, I think, administered by the district administration there. So we had around, I think, 50 to 65 students in the classroom. So now the teachers, I think, asked us to introduce ourselves. Now, before me, coincidentally, one Chinese student was there. And her husband is a professor at a Kyoto University. So she introduced herself, spoken in yes, English of course. Then my turn, and I do speak little broken Japanese too by that time. So then I said, yes, I'm Jigmey Tsultrim and watashi wa Tibetojin desu, means I'm Tibetan. So then this teacher, she couldn't understand where is Tibet. Tibet, so she said, where? I'm sorry, where's Tibet? Then I said, okay, I won't go in detail. India, Bhutan, Nepal, China, Russia, Mongolia, then Tibet here. Then this, my colleague or my friend, the Chinese student, she raised her hand. Oh, no Tibet, there is no Tibet, she said. Then I said, whether there is a Tibet or not, we may debate later, but please let me first finish my introduction. So now, after a month, or after some couple of months, we became very good friends. Because originally she is from the southern part of China, Guangdong, but they don't have the information on Tibet. They think that Tibet, historically, geographically, it's very much part of China, I think. Now, after some times, we became so good friends that sometimes she called me after 9-10 p.m. Then sometimes I jokingly used to tell her, don't call in the midnight, your husband might doubt you. Now this husband, who is a professor at Kyoto University, also we became very good friends. Because he, being a professor, he doesn't know much about those facts. See, this is the so-called authoritarian beauty of authoritarian regimes, I think, that you don't have good information there. So people like you, I would expect that you do a thorough information, you do thorough research. Yes, go for all this information, then try to do whatever you think consciously that you feel that you should be doing. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Question. I would be interested in how good is the presentation of women in this democratic system you spoke about. For example, you spoke about 44 representatives.
Yes.
How much of them are women?
Good questions. Being a student of sociology, I do feel that women's role is something very undeniable, something very equally important. So now today, in 44 Tibetan parliamentarians that we have today in our parliament, we have 11 women representatives. And the reservation for a women's seat in Tibetan parliament did exist in 1970s itself, in 1979 itself in fact. So I don't know whether it's true or not, but I did have this information that even in Europe that time, there wasn't any reservation seat for the women in the parliament. So maybe Tibetan parliament in exile have been a little modernized, I think. That in 1970s too, we have a women reservation seat in the parliament. So now today, we have 11 members, 11 women representatives in the Tibetan parliament. And having said that, I just would like to share my own. We Tibetans also do have so-called the patriarchal society, where the man is more superior in the sense that. But when we talk about private and public domains, there's a big shift, I think, big shift. Now, my grandmother would initially, she can't expect or she can't imagine that I go and enter into kitchen and doing something there. Because for her, this is the role of my wife, in fact. So that domain system is there. But now she gradually accepts that yes, men and women are equally responsible. They do have equal, capabilities to exercise and then of course to take part in any kind of issues that there are, even in terms of politics, even in terms of social, or even in terms of any other issues that are involved. So yes, now if you have more time, or if you have more, lower interest or deeper interest, if you do a survey within the Tibetan administration, you might find the number of Tibetan women in staff more than Tibetan men there. So see, this is one of the examples that we have. And even here, how there are 2 women staff we have and 2 men staff we have. Just for example, this is just a small example. So yes, the Tibetan women has been given, I personally believe, a lot of importance to know yourself, your rights, and then to come forward and then, mushroom yourself. This is what we believe, and I personally believe in that way. Am I clear to you?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Well, I'm admiring and awed by the inspiration and brilliance of setting up this political structure for the community in exile and developing it. I mean, I just think it's brilliant, and I don't know if there's any parallel in any other community of exiles around the world. I guess that's a question in itself. But my main question was, I wonder how, I'm curious how engaged the Tibetan community in exile is at large, given that it's geographically scattered,
Right.
and how it works to gather people's votes and
Right.
party.
I would appreciate. And in fact, one of my effort to touch during this session is also on this point. Tibetans, as I said initially, that are scattered all around the world, but majorly they are in India. And in India, Nepal and Bhutan, we have around 54 Tibetan settlements there. And Department of Home caters to the needs of the Tibetan residing in India, Nepal and Bhutan. And each settlement is supervised or being administered by so-called Tibetan settlement officer. So Tibetan settlement officer is the sole representative of the central Tibetan administration in the respective regions. So he or she is liable, responsible for the welfare, including everything from taking part in election, taking part in other trainings, taking part in other protests, or arranging any kind of programs there. So he or she is the responsibility. Having said that, depending upon the size and the population of these Tibetan refugee settlements in exile, we do have also the so-called Tibetan freedom movement. Okay, this is what called Herawan Dembe Ligu. So, and then apart from this, we have a regional, local justice commission also. Then we have local Tibetan assembly also. So, if there is an issue that is prevalent within that respective region, the local Tibetan assembly raise this issue in their respective sessions there, which happens like twice a year. So this is how it works. And then apart from this, here at the Central Tibetan Administration in Dharamsala, we have two parliament sessions that takes place, one in summer or beginning of summer, should I say spring in March somewhere. So that's rather budget session. And then which normally happens here in September. So these are the two sessions. So if any of you are staying longer, from September 18th till 28th of September, we have 15th Parliament session, which will hold its session, September session this time. So you guys can, of course, most welcome, can go and observe and have an audience sort of thing there. So how it functions there. We don't have multi-party system, but then yes, there's a cabinet who sits on the right hand, and then there's other members of the parliament, they sit on the other cross. So then this is how the issues are being debated, discussed, and then highlighted. Am I clear?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yeah, my question refers to the last one. So, you spoke about like democratic elections and that they vote, they give their vote.
Yes, of course.
Do you have like a number of the participation of the election?
Yes, I think, now I don't have the exact number, but in 2001 we had of the Tibetan head of the Tibetan parliament, Tibetan cabinet. So in 2001, in terms of percentage, it was somewhere around, I think, 50 plus something. Now in 2011, the public's participation in election, in voting, it rise up at least by 20%, I guess. So it came around 69 or 70% there. So I think, but for correct information, please visit tibet.net. The information is just there. But then, as I would like to share with you that we had certainly a very unexpected number of rise from 2001 to 2011, that even the youth, they start taking part. The SMS, you know, those Facebook, those Twitter starts functioning by the grace of, by then I think Obama's election in the US, I guess. So these things also did took place here. And you had a Facebook saying, yes, I'm a Tibetan, I'm going to vote, sort of thing. Those things were there. So, if I understand you properly, your question, your concern, is that yes, we had a figure which has risen up from 50% to 60 plus percentage, or near around 70%, who did participated in the election, you know, that took place in 2011. Any other? Yes, yes, please.
What would be the main concern of the community in exile besides returning to Tibet?
Oh, besides, right?
Leaving that aside because...
Yes. Yes, I think as shared with you earlier, that our main focus, our main concern would be to restore a genuine national regional autonomy within the framework of People's Republic of China. If and when there's a situation that we may not be able to avail that kind of autonomy, till that time, our main focus would be to, impart proper, both traditional and modern education for our Tibetan youth, for our Tibetan coming generations. That would be our main focus. So having said that, we have today, I think, more than 70 plus Tibetan schools, and we have more than 25 nunneries and monasteries.
May I interrupt? But that is the concern of the Tibetan parliament, or the concern of the people who want more educational programs?
Yes, that's the concern of both.
Okay.
That's the concern of both. Now the reason why I say the concern of both is because Tibetans, the Tibetan people, in their respective regions, and the Tibetan parliament, and the Tibetan Kashak, the Tibetan cabinet, I believe that all of us, we have the same feeling, or we have the same concern, that as long as we have to stay in India, we do have to preserve and practice our own, the soul, very precious, the lineage that we the lineage that we enshrine over the past decades and centuries. That is none other than the Tibetan culture. So as long as we don't have this Tibetan culture with us, so this Tibetan identity would not remain with us. So therefore, from monasteries to nunneries to schools, both modern and traditional schools, we have been in practice today. Yes, please.
My question was a very quick one. My name is Bonnie.
Right, thank you.
Minimum voting age or age?
Yeah, the minimum, yes, I think, for a person who is allowed to vote, he or she has to be above the 18. So 18 is the minimum, or should I say maximum, I guess. So that is the age that if a person comes across the 18, then I think he or she is allowed to do vote. So that's the thing. And any other informations? I'm there at the Meglod Ganj. There's an office called TCC, it's called Tibetan Career Center. And Tibetan Career Center, are there anyone who's from US? Oh yes. So there's a program which is being run by the support of US Aid. And program is being coordinated here or implemented here with Department of Home, and there's a company called TechnoServe. It has in regional, I think, headquarters based in Mumbai, but the main headquarters are based in US. So the basic focus of this program is to reach to those Tibetan youth in exile, those who have received the educational opportunities those who have degrees and certifications with them, but they are unemployed. And then many of them, they are school dropouts, college dropouts, but still they are no job. So now, this is a big challenge for me, in fact. And since I'm a Tibetan civil servant, so I don't have a ground experience in this. But yes, we have to work regardless of whatever the assignment that has been given to you. In my initial introduction, I think it was told that I work also here as a museum director. Now it's a big challenge for me. I don't know nothing about what is M and what is U, what is E, what is museum, what it makes really. But then yes, you have to accept those challenges. Now this office, Tibetan Career Center, it's a very big challenge for me. Because whether Tibetan community will survive or sustain or not, that would solely depend upon the Tibetan youth of today. Because our parents and grandparents, they have done their best. That's how today, gentlemen like him, he's a photographer. Then ladies like her, she's a graduate. And of course in my case, I'm a graduate. So now we could able to at least learn so-called modern education and then could able to share the same kind of platform to you, with you. And if our parents, grandparents, they couldn't have done in that way, we could be, who knows, could be a rickshaw puller in Chandni Chowk, I don't know. Right? So you never know. So now, again, we believe that one of the concern that what we are facing today is the Tibetan youth, those who are unemployed. Their so-called the numbers are becoming more and more. Right? And unfortunately, I don't know whether it would be proper for me to say here or not, but they have a vision to go somewhere, Europe, US, or somewhere else. They don't wish to sustain here. This is what we feel a big concern for us. That you have your own settlements here, you have your own institutions here. Why not try to find out, explore this space here? Right? So I think that would bring us to another chapter, which we may discuss some other time.
Can I just ask one question,
Please.
which is related to that on the other side of the coin?
Just a minute. Okay, please.
Oh, very quickly.
Yeah.
I have read that there's a school of thought that of people who want independence rather than autonomy.
Right.
I'm just wondering.
No, I don't think it's. I don't. Maybe I would say it's 15 to 20%, I guess. Yeah, or even lesser than that. But yes, we do believe that they have the right. They have the right to express whatever they feel that it is appropriate or not. We don't condemn those things. It's very clear. You have the right where you want to go, of course, but you should know your limit. So having said that, so we don't oppose any kind of these kind of ideas. But yes, you should, at the same time, you must also ensure that the realistic, optimistic approach to that kind of ideology. Then you have that. You're just saying independence would not solve, I think. Therefore, if you read this story called Moving the Mountains, so that's something which gives you another explanation, I guess. Yes, please.
Very short, I don't Tibet into India, they do not receive the, let's say, refugee status.
Right.
And they have kind of a student visa for a year and maybe they have to go back to Tibet.
Right.
Is that so really? Or is
Certainly the solution there, and the Central Tibetan Administration, the respective concerned departments are taking care of those issues. But yes, those Tibetans who arrived all the way from Tibet, once they arrive through Nepal, because in Nepal we have a reception center, then the reception center in Nepal, they inform all the lists to the UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And once we get the recommendation from UNHCR, these informations are given to the Indian embassy in Nepal. And this is how the Tibetans, they do arrive here. Okay, legally. Now after here, It depends for what purpose they are here. And mainly, there are four purposes. Either to come and receive the blessing from His Holiness. Either, to come for the pilgrimage or get enrolled in monasteries and nunneries. And then to get educational opportunities. So these are the four reasons. But then the government of India has their own standards to scrutinize.
But you mean these four reasons, these Tibetans, they want to go back to Tibet after finishing their...
No, yeah, that's what we normally encourage them is that after you finish your job, your objectives, purpose, you should go back to Tibet so that you can serve more better there. You can live with your own community. This is what we encourage them. But yes, it's absolutely to his or her wish that whether you'd like to stay back here or not. And accordingly, that residential permit, whether it's educational one or other one status, the status are then therefore changed depending upon the screening at the concerned time.
And the Chinese allow them to come back to Tibet?
Yeah, of course.
Without recommends or things like that?
No, they do. They do. Many Tibetans, they do go back. They are allowed to. But it's a different issue whether they have been allowed or they have been welcomed in colorful or not. Okay. So,
Mr. Jigmey Tsultrim for sharing his information with us and giving us a detailed, very clear information on democratization of Tibetan government in exile. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming here and taking out your time and supporting us for the just cause of Tibet. Thank you so much. And as a token of appreciation, I would like to present to him a small gift and a scarf.
That is in fact not necessary.
Thank you so much.
No, Thank you.